Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just share my screen right now. And Sanjay, can you just confirm you can see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So thanks again for having me. As mentioned, my name is Sundar. I lead International Growth Marketing Analytics at Uber. And I'm here to talk today about lifecycle marketing and funnel optimization. As kind of the brochure says, the key learnings today are to understand how we can better understand our customers' behavior and align it with our goals to build effective lifecycle marketing strategies, explore strategies to map user journeys, and then how to get them back as active consumers, and then finally how we improve conversion rates by delivering long-term customer value. What I wanted to do though a little bit differently is I actually wanted to talk more about how we as companies can set up our teams and like really focus on the foundations. Because if I sat here and talked about specific strategies, right, there's obviously this context of we're at Uber, B2C, global, that might not necessarily apply to every company here. So I wanted to actually focus a bit more on the overall foundational work. And so the first thing I wanted to set up is how to set up your team to succeed, right? When we talk about lifecycle strategies, all of those are built by teams, whether it's a team of analysts, CRM experts, performance marketing experts. So how do you actually set up your team to get better at lifecycle marketing? First, more data does not equal better results. I think this is a pretty common error that we see, especially amongst companies that are trying to be data-driven, where if you have an issue, throwing more data at it and having more data does not translate to better results. In fact, if you don't have the right processes in place, you can actually get overwhelmed with your data and get analysis paralysis, and you're sort of trapped in this like constant circle of really thinking about data. And so what I recommend is you actually start with your basic first party data. Most of the data that we capture just through our apps or through our websites are often good enough to start lifecycle marketing strategies. The most important part, and I think throughout the deck I will say, testing, and more importantly, culture of testing, is by far the most important thing that you can do in your company to actually get data informed or data driven results. And when I say that, what I really mean is you have to let mistakes happen, and better yet, you have to encourage them. If you don't have a culture where mistakes are happening and you're learning from them, then you're probably not innovating enough. You're really not truly learning about your part of the market. So then you should test from end to end with first party data. If you don't build the full life cycle, and I mean life cycle internally within your company of an idea, then you're really not building a data-driven culture. And so that goes from having people that feel comfortable sharing hypotheses to analysis, testing, stakeholder management to execution. By stakeholder management, specifically what I mean is if you have an idea and you test it, you need to have that culture of saying, okay, I'm going to present this to senior leadership. I'm going to have buy-in. I'm going to be cross-functional and collaborative, have product. There's so many parts of our companies that we work with, and then you have to be able to execute it. But if you can't do that with first-party data, with your own internal data, and you don't have the right systems in place, then really adding more data doesn't really do much for you. And so the final step is, add more data. Once you've already touched these first 4 steps and can actually get really good at that, is where you should add more data to get into better lifecycle marketing and retention strategies. And then obviously when you think about lifecycle marketing and what the steps are, I'm going to outline a few steps, and they get from easier to harder. But by easier, I would not say less important. In fact, they're the most important. They're the foundation on which you should build your lifecycle marketing strategies and retention strategies. And of course, testing is essential between all of these steps. Like I said, it's a really important part of us as growth marketers. And we really need to learn to build these cultures of testing. First, create high-level life cycles and then sub-life cycles. And I'll go into a little bit about what that means exactly. 2, monitoring and BI. We often think of BI as just like a Tableau or some person in the corner building these dashboards. And in fact, they're an integral part of lifecycle marketing and retention marketing. Because if you don't have the right monitoring and BI in place, really all of your work is going to come, whether it's 6 months too late or a year too late, and you're already hitting these cycles that are not what you want. So monitoring and BI are really important. 3 is funnel mapping. And it's weird to say funnel mapping should be third, but to me, getting really nitty gritty on like every little step of your funnel is not going to be important if you don't have the the monitoring in place, if you don't have the culture in place to be able to test on that. So that's why I actually have it as third. 4th is basic segmentation. And again, I'll get into a bit about like what that means to be basic segmentation. You actually heard a little bit of it on the last panel, where a lot of these companies that we're hearing present are sort of basic in their segmentation. They're sort of foundational, and then they're slowly building it over time. And that's exactly the approach that I recommend, is start simple, start easy, and then build. And then the 5th is really the bonus. It's advanced segmentation and ML, which I'll kind of touch into as well. So how do you create high-level life cycles? So at Uber, and I cover all lines of our business, so the rider, driver, eater, courier, restaurants on the Uber Eats side. So as you can imagine, we have many different customers. So I'm just gonna, throughout this, most of these examples, pick the rider side because it's a little bit more aligned with what most of us know as customers. Uber riders, they sign up, they take a first trip, they continue riding, they churn, and then they resurrect, right? Those are at a high level, the life cycles that you can think about. How do we define these life cycles? So sign up, pretty easy. Take a first trip, pretty easy, right? Those are very distinct black and white life cycle. What about churn? What about resurrect? And I'll kind of go into how you can set up your companies to just build really simple life cycles and sub-life cycles. And then, the second part is, can we define more granular life cycles? Great, you've defined this overall life cycle. Is there some parts of the life cycle that we can even get even more specific with? And so here's an example, defining the life cycle between sign up and first trip. So if you look at the chart on the left, on the x-axis is days from sign up to first trip. So obviously we're going to start on left, it's about 0, and then it's going to keep going to the right as you get further away from signing up. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the cumulative conversion rate. So over time, as you can imagine, the cumulative conversion rate is going to go up over time. But what do we see with this? Like, this is a simple chart that any junior analyst should be able to pull. It's fairly straightforward. And what can we actually see with this? And first, if you look to the left of the line, right, you're going to see an initial spike. So very close to when you sign up, most people are converting to their first trip. And then what's the second thing you notice? For me, when I look at this, I say, okay, well, if you look to the right of this line, it's effectively plateaued. And so again, what do we see? There's an initial inflection point. Well, maybe then the organic conversion rate is happening within the first couple of days from sign up to first trip. So most of the first trip conversion rates, most of the first trip conversions are happening immediately in the first few days from sign up. So why don't we go ahead and call this period fresh signups? So 0 to say X days is fresh signups. The second point is that point of plateau. It's this right-hand line, right? And so you can see after that effectively we're not going to convert people. It's going to be very minimal, very probably expensive, probably not the highest quality conversions, late adopters and things like that. And so we're going to call these users stale signups. And now, from a simple chart that will take a junior analyst no more than 30 minutes to pull, we've effectively created 2 life cycles. And actually, we've even made it 3. So you have fresh, which is the period to the left of the line. Let's call this the soft signups, where they have some period to convert, but it's going to take some effort. And then everything to the right is stale. So it becomes prohibitively harder. This is, again, just simple foundational lifecycle segmentation. These are now we've created an additional 2 sub-life cycles. Let's look at another example. When you think of churn, churn is always complicated. For our business, what does that mean? For other businesses, for example, the travel business, people might only take 1 or 2 trips in the entire year. If you're an airline company, how do you define churn? You can define it in multiple different ways. For us, for example, if we look at this chart, if you look at the x-axis, it's days from last trip. And then on the y-axis, we're saying the probability of taking a next trip. So And what we're seeing here is that the further away you get from your last trip, you have a lower probability of taking another trip. So essentially over time, you are more likely to have churned. And so we can define churn as the average number of days around which the probability of taking a trip is almost zero. So as you get closer to the zero line, we can just define this line and say, okay, you know what? Anyone who hasn't taken a trip in the past X days is churned. Again, this is a chart that any analyst should be able to pull. But now you've already got just some basic foundational segments that are telling you, you know what, if we define anyone who hasn't taken a trip in X days as churn, we can now create lifecycle marketing around them, right? We now know someone is churned and defined as churn, which is simple segmentation. So we can offer them a promotion, we can send them an email, maybe we can flag some of the new features we've built. You know, I think we all as marketers have a variety of tools at our disposal to how to resurrect someone. But the first part of that is to define someone as churned. And again, a simple chart, very easy, very straightforward. And more importantly, you can customize this for every different region if you want to. So in the Middle East, this might look different than in the US because of different use cases. And so now, based on a simple chart, you can create lifecycle segments that can be customizable for your region as well. And that was just step one. And again, two basic charts that really just talk about two basic lifecycle segmentations. The second step is monitoring and BI. And again, I think BI oftentimes has this connotation where it's just like, hey, we build dashboards, or you know, they're not an important part. And oftentimes you'll have stakeholders come in and ask for BI, and they're really not going to action on it. Monitoring and BI is really fundamental. And if you don't have actionable business intelligence and monitoring tools in place, you're usually not going to be effective at lifecycle marketing. Growth accounting, and I'll cover quickly what that means, is extremely important. And so if you think about it, growth comes from multiple different places. It comes from churn, resurrection, acquisition, and obviously just those that are currently active. And so this is an example of a dashboard that we built in Google Sheets, but is really effective. So in the far left, you have month one monthly active users. Of those users, some of them have churned. Then we add people that were resurrecting, so people that used to be churned that have now come back. Then we've acquired new users. And now we have the second month's monthly active users. And now we have a pretty decent picture of where is our growth coming from? What are the different components of our growth? And again, very simple monitoring, but highly effective. Churn, as we all know, can cripple companies, and good monitoring and good definitions of it are foundational to preventing it. And if you just had month one monthly active users and month two monthly active users, that's just going to be, it's always going to look generally up and to the right until it's too late, because all of a sudden your churn will become higher than your new acquisitions, and then your monthly active users will start to go down. So it's really important to get ahead of this curve by just building in very simple and basic monitoring and business intelligence. And then three, the third part of this is funnel mapping. So when we talk about like strategies for funnel mapping, I really almost don't even think there's a strategy. It's really just simply getting down and just writing all the different pain points and touch points that a user has, and then building that proper monitoring dashboarding. So here's what the top of our funnel at Uber looks like for the rider side. For the driver side, when we're trying to acquire drivers, it can be even more complicated as they have to add IDs, government, identification, bank account information, all this other stuff. This is just for the rider side, arguably our simplest consumer. Welcome screen, phone number, mobile verification, email, password, name screen, terms and conditions, and then they've created an account. You have a payment wall, then they're ready to request, then they have to enter a destination, then they select a product, then they request, and then they've completed a trip. This might not even be the full funnel. This is, I think, a majority of it, but there's approximately 14 steps before a rider can take their first trip. All I had to do as a person that was like trying to map this is just to go and pretend that I was signing up from scratch. And then you can see all of these, right? Or you can obviously go to your product teams or your design teams and they can give you this information. But the point is that there are no really, to me, crazy strategies on how to map your funnel. It can be this simple. And it's just about all the experiences and all the different touch points. And you can get into a room and just kind of be like, what about this? What about this? And that's how you create this list. But now the next step from here is to say, well, do I have the proper monitoring in place? Like, do I know the drop off from steps 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and so on? And again, very simple. I mean, most of this have these events in our database systems, but then it's creating the right monitoring for it. Here's what it looks like from a trip perspective, right? And now we can start to say, once a person has requested a trip, right? We already had 14 steps to request and complete a trip. Once they've requested, what happens? Well, we give them an estimated time of arrival. They put in their estimated pickup location. We give them an estimated time of journey. Then what's the actual time? What's the actual pickup location? What about the differences? If we told them it was 3 minutes, it took 10 minutes. Was there a phone call? What was their first interaction? Did the driver and rider say hi to each other? In car, the interaction, right? What was the directions? What was the mapping? You know, did they use Waze? Did they use Google Maps? What service are they using? What's their music? What's the car sent? Actual drop-off location, the actual time of journey, right? This is how complex it is, but all of this is really just simply going through the exercise of what is it like to be in our users' experience. And here, what we're saying here is you need to have all of this again monitored, and you need to understand like all these different touch points, because once you have the monitoring in place, if for example, let's say that the estimated time of arrival for the driver to go pick up the rider is 5 minutes, and then it actually became 7 minutes, you can start to plot that and say, well, if that difference starts to grow, so say the first time a user experiences Uber and they have like a 10-minute difference between when it was expected to come and when it actually came, what does their journey look like? Just by plotting these, we now know the pain points that we can monitor and look for. And that's really important. And then finally, sorry, in the last example, right? Just another example of churn. And here's some of the factors that could lead to churn: poor experience, price, they don't have a use case, competition. So in the first step, we define churn. And in the second step, now when we're funnel mapping, we can see all the different things that could lead to churn. And so now when you think of lifecycle strategies, for example, we say poor experience. Well, how can we sort of monitor that? Well, if the rider gave the driver a 1 star, or the driver gave the rider a 1 star, clearly some poor experience happened. So now we know that's happened. We can now predict that they're going to churn, but then we send them communications or promotions or outreach, you know, a variety of different tools that we have, and we can prevent that churn. But it's because we mapped these different funnels and these different factors that lead to churn that we're able to then build lifecycle marketing strategy around it. And finally, I kind of want to get into basic segmentation. Again, everyone, I think, thinks the holy grail is personalization, machine learning, and that is definitely true. But if you don't have the components in place to action on that, a culture of knowledge sharing and actually building out different products and tools for these different segmentations, then building out a robust segmentation platform is actually quite expensive. And so here's basic segmentation that we could use at Uber. A commute trip is 6 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 8 p.m. And then a weekday definition is all of the weekday times. The social hours are Friday and Saturday, 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. Of course, in the Middle East, that can change a little. And again, that's part of the beauty of having simple segmentation, is you can shift around a little bit and not have to dive too much into all the different like expenses that might be for customization. And then, so for example, weekend or all other weekend times. And so now we've created this basic lifecycle segmentation, or sorry, this is actually use case segmentation. And then we can combine it with the lifecycle segmentation. So we can look at people that, for example, have now churned. And we can also go back and say, wow, they mostly rode during commute. So let's look at their trips during this commute time and see what may have happened to cause them to churn. Now I'm combining the fact that I have lifecycle segmentation, basic use case segmentation, and I know my touch points. So I'll go and look and say, wow, their average price over the past 3 months has gone up 20%, for whatever reason. And we can diagnose that, and then we can say, okay, why don't we give them a promotion for their next week? Why don't we send them comms saying why and like what's going on in the market, right? A few different things. But all of this is possible just from a few charts, a few basic queries, and a few foundational analyses. And so how do you bring it all together? And so finally, I'm just going to go through an example of how we would use all these foundational different things at Uber. So hypothesis: drivers who drive their first trip during the social hours may actually churn quicker. And this actually is an example that I had done, before I was managing teams. And the thought was, I knew that our CRM comm said, hey, drivers, like the best time to start driving is Friday evenings. I like saw that email and I was like, in my mind, I said, okay, if I were told to drive Friday evening and I was just on this new platform, it's pretty scary. It's rush hour. It's already pretty crazy. And I have to learn a new app. I'm just picking up a new rider. I don't know, this is my new experience. Like I would actually be pretty frightened. And so what did I do? I just quickly pulled a retention chart grouped by where a driver drives on their first trip. So if, for example, when they drive. So I plotted a retention chart says, let's take all of the drivers whose first trip was during Friday social hours. And let's take every other driver who drives maybe Saturday afternoon when it's a little quieter. And you just plot a retention chart over their next 6 months. And very simply and very easily, I was able to see that those that drive during Saturday afternoon have better retention because their first experience is not difficult. It's not scary and it's not overwhelming. And then you go into that next step. Well, we needed drivers during, the Friday social scene because that's when it's when most people are in demand and it sort of, is the best time for us as a marketplace to get them to drive. But we really have to think about the customer over their long term, right? Getting an extra driver to do an hour today might lead to a lot less hours over the lifetime of them on our platform. So you have to convince your general manager, operations team, the CRM team, which is sending out the emails, and finance of these impacts. But that culture was there where I could find a data-driven solution, and it was data-informed, go to my stakeholders, convince them, and then the execution is quite simple. The CRM communications team said, okay, as we onboard driver in that first part of the funnel, we will tell them the best times to drive to just learn about how to use our app, how to use our platform is actually Saturday afternoons. And those effects, carry on indefinitely. And then finally, just bonus is advanced segmentation in ML, right? So advanced segmentation is really incorporating more than first-party data. You can create value-based segmentation. So for example, a family businesswoman versus a student, what are their needs? Demographic and psychographic information, and you start to get to personalization. When you think of ML models, it's churn prediction, right? So what is the likelihood this person is going to churn based on their current or past few trips? You can do cross-sell and upsell models. So, when we think about adding value to our customers, it's saying, hey, like we have this product, we have these products, like have you tried Uber Eats? And then you can obviously do high value prediction. So identifying who are the highest value customers for us, how do we continue to engage them? Then you can even think about bringing in other parts of the business. So let's make sure marketing, our community support, and our operational teams are all focusing on these high value riders. But again, that's all bonus. And unless you have that culture to be able to implement these changes, it's really just, having stuff that's really not that effective. And with that, I can turn it over for questions.
Thank you so much, Sundar. That was a great presentation. Just looking at our question tab over here, and we have a few questions. I think we're going to take the first one. The delegates want to try and understand is what strategies have worked out well for you to obtain or to bring back churn customers?
Yeah, so oftentimes promotions are some of the most effective levers, right? When you think about just like incentivizing riders. We've actually, especially now during COVID, seen some really interesting behaviors on churn customers because, they may have churned for whatever reason, but now their need for Uber and their need for, maybe they can't rely on public transportation is quite different. So now for us, it's been re-messaging with safety messaging and saying, hey, here are the new safety features we've implemented. Here's what's changed over the past 3-4 months that is really different now than what you may be used to. And so I think those are, just highlighting the changes you've made to your platform, how you become better, but also, of course, promotions and sort of incentivization can also work as well.
Right. And given the current situation, the pandemic, obviously there's a lot of behavioral changes that are hailing now, and I think ride-hailing apps are going to be impacted in the coming years. How have you seen behavioral changes? How do you see it? What are you doing to work around it?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we're trying to focus on is we want to be there when people are ready to ride with us.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Bye.
I think. Sorry, 1 second. When people are ready to ride is when we want to come there. So what we don't want to be doing is like pushing and saying like, hey, like, let's ride now, right? What we're realizing is that customers are riding when they're ready to ride. And what we can do and our job is to do is to highlight, some of the practices we've made and changes we've made. So for example, one of the new things we've said is no mask, no ride. So it's protecting the driver, especially who may be exposed to some of these things. And so what we want to do is, again, just push that sort of top of mind awareness in terms of safety, because at this current juncture, like the only thing that matters is safety and should be safety.
Right. And do we take one last question? I think this is something that even I want to know. Does growth marketing really have a saturation point? How long can brands effectively implement growth strategies? Is it a long-term vision? Is it something that it's a quick hack to get on, subscribers to use your app? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, so what it is a long journey. I think the simplest way I'll say it is that, because I think a lot of times when you think of these growth companies, they actually sort of mask these underlying trends, like I kind of alluded to before, of like churn, right? So your top of funnel looks really great, and all this, your monthly active users always looking great, but at some point, if you don't address churn and retention, then you will start to plateau. And so it's not just a quick fix. In fact, I would almost encourage people to make it quick and simple in the beginning, and then slowly start to build out those practices. So, churn, again, is like one of the biggest things that I think can derail a company. So there's always churn optimization, right? There's always conversion optimization there. There's highlighting better use cases. Like as we get smarter, realizing that a person that takes Uber once every 3 months, but only ever takes Uber and it's only ever to the airport, is okay. It's a good customer. It's a loyal customer. It can be a high value customer because our airport trips are fairly profitable, but it's identifying that. And so it's not saying, hey, you haven't taken a trip in 3 months, so we should give you a promotion, because that could be their behavior. So as personalization becomes more top of mind, right, you start to eke out and you start to like really gain those incremental benefits. But in the beginning, it should be fairly quick and simple. And then over time, there's still always continued optimization.
Right.